Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Lawyers. I'm Leslie Rohde. Today we're discussing spoliation of evidence, in particular, spoliation in the digital age, which is the title of an article written by our guest today, Allegra Carpenter. She's an attorney in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Ms. Carpenter is not only an acclaimed personal injury and medical malpractice attorney, but she's also a trial consultant who helps other attorneys in preparations for trials. And she recently wrote that article entitled Spoliation in the Digital Age. It was published in the January 2019 issue of Trial magazine. Welcome, Allegra. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Leslie.
Let's start with what is spoliation?
It's a good question, and it's a term most people aren't familiar with. It's a concept not too different than what we're hearing a lot about in the news right now of obstruction with justice. Spoliation is when someone takes evidence and tries to modify it or change it or to cover something up. We used to think about this in like the old TV crime movies as someone throwing a weapon in the river or trying to wipe away fingerprints or shredding documents, erasing hard drives, sometimes intimidate witnesses. This happens not only in the criminal context, but it happens also in the civil context. And these behaviors are understood by the courts to reflect a guilty conscience. And so there are sanctions that are attached to that and punishments that come when that's done either in a criminal context or a civil context. A case that describes this pretty well is it is the unexplained and intentional destruction of evidence by a litigant, and it gives rise to an inference that the evidence would have been unfavorable to the case. And more this is becoming relevant as more evidence is available because of the digital age.
And that digital age, I know things have changed dramatically when we're talking about that spoliation of evidence. Can you give us some examples of how it's changed?
So in the pre-computer era, where you would see destruction of evidence was in things like, like I said, hiding the weapon or shredding documents, not saving a defective product. That was sort of the arena where you would see people trying to revise history and modify evidence. As computers and electronic data became more available, you started seeing the spoliation efforts manifest in deleting emails or not having a backup on your server or taping over videotapes. Remember when we had videotapes and people would either destroy the tapes or just tape over them. And so that was sort of how we would see that happen. But in this modern technological era that we are in, where almost everything we do involves a digital footprint, what we're seeing is surveillance video that is in every home, every business, on every corner. That evidence becomes subject to potential spoliation when people want to hide what has been collected. You might see text messages often become relevant in these cases to proving what happened when traffic cams. There's dash and lapel cams on police officers. We have health application data on our phones, geolocation information and data that's available. Everything people do and say on social media is out there now. Digital photography on our phones also shows where we were, often connects who we are with, and it can show the exact precise timing of things. Electronic medical records, all of our medical records now are electronic. And so this has become sort of a new frontier where not only does evidence exist, but it is possible that people who are trying to cover their tracks might get in there and try to muck with it.
Yeah, we basically live in that digital age. So yes, I can totally understand that change.
I apologize. And one last thing I forgot to mention is that the future of this area of law is one to watch, because what we're now seeing are efforts by law enforcement, for example, to resist having to share evidence with the public. So people are kind of trying to use it in two different ways, and we're starting to have to develop in the law better systems for managing electronic data at the outset of litigation.
In your article, you focus on premises liability, and we want to understand why that's such an important topic in these types of cases.
The Trial magazine was running a whole issue on premises liability, and that's why this article focuses on the premises litigation arena. But the reason Trial magazine asked me to get involved with this is that they knew that I had experience in premises cases, and in particular in the arena of convenience store negligent security. So it used to be that being a convenience store worker was one of the most dangerous jobs you could have, because if you were working alone on the graveyard shift with cash in the drawer, these unsophisticated criminals who are looking for easy cash would come in and try to steal it, rob it, or they might be trying to rob alcohol in these convenience stores late at night. And there were no cameras or a second clerk on shift or any security devices whatsoever for these people. And so I became one of many lawyers involved in litigation to try to get accountability to families of clerks or even sometimes customers who are harmed in these situations, and also to change the law to make stores safer. And at that time, the stores were resisting having cameras. But over time, they realized it's really not in our advantage to have the cameras, right? Because they may deter crime, they help you catch the criminals. And so every time you can catch one of these guys, because they usually are serial offenders. And so my work in that area and becoming aware of the value of surveillance video and the value of all that electronic data sort of merged in this issue in the Trial magazine.
We see those surveillance cameras in every business out there about, but I'm wondering, do they have to save that video forever for an extended period of time? Is there any legal ramification on them there?
Right. So there's currently no laws. There's no general laws around this. There is a rule of reason, though, and this is what gets imposed by the court. If you have reason to know that some video has captured a criminal act or an activity that could be relevant to civil litigation, there is an absolute duty to preserve that evidence. Just as a practical matter, currently most video is stored for 30 days. That's just the sort of routine of industry. And even like if you get a home Nest system or something like that that has your video being saved for a number of days, it's usually 30 days. You can choose to store things longer or shorter. It used to be that storing digital data was expensive because it was voluminous data, but with improvements in the technology, that is becoming less and less and less the case. And so the economic justification to destroy it just isn't there anymore. So I think over time, people will save this for longer. But in any event, if you have it, you have a duty to preserve it if you know it's relevant.
But is it okay for them to delete that? Say they do have a policy in case, like you mentioned, that at the end of 30 days they start over or delete that part. It's okay for them to delete it? Is that what I understand?
If they have no reason to think that there's anything on it that is relevant to a dispute, a legal dispute, then of course, yes, it's your property and you may destroy it and use it as you will. You're not obligated to save it for other people, but if you have a reason to suspect that it's needed for some reason, then you do have a duty to save it.
So what can a person do if he or she is hurt at a business to preserve that video surveillance, make sure it's still around?
Right. So the opposite side of the coin of spoliation is preservation. So we all want, lawyers don't look for cases of spoliation. What we want is to be able to achieve the aims of justice, which is to find the truth. And so this evidence is part of that truth, that search for the truth. So what a lawyer would do if they hear about a harm happening at a premises or in a hospital or wherever it may be, is they send out something called a preservation of evidence letter. And that letter to the holder of the evidence is designed to put them on notice that we certainly hope litigation doesn't come of this, but it may. And therefore, you need to hold on to that evidence or provide it to us now so that we can hold on to it securely. Because of the 30-day window, the loose window that's out there, those preservation of evidence letters need to go out right away. And if you don't have a lawyer yourself and you think something like this has happened and you haven't had a chance to get with a lawyer, you should request that video. And sometimes the video is not in the hands of the culpable party, it's just in the hands of some third party. And so you just need to go to that third party and say, hey, listen, do you have any surveillance video? If you're in a car crash, you might walk around the scene of the crash and see if any homes have video right there on the front of their house. Often these people have surveillance happening that may help you to prove what happened in the crash. So you need to go out there and try to collect the evidence ideally. But if you can't collect it, then you need to put the holder of the evidence on notice that you might need it in the litigation and that you expect them to preserve it.
You mentioned that POE, that preservation of evidence letter.
Mm-hmm.
And of course an attorney can do that, but can put that out there. But what about a layperson? Could anybody involved in something like this, could they create a POE?
You absolutely can. I'm hesitant to tell anybody this is exactly what you do because it really depends on the circumstances of your case. But at a minimum, a preservation of evidence letter A needs to be in writing. And you need to make sure that it goes to the owner of the business. And it needs to notify the business owner that you believe, and again, you can say this politely, you certainly hope that there's no need for litigation or a dispute of any kind, but you believe that evidence that they are holding may be relevant, and therefore you're putting them on notice that litigation may result, and that they need to hold on to and preserve that evidence. And sometimes you're requesting just the surveillance video itself. You may be requesting backups of that data. You may be requesting all of the metadata that goes with it. It just really depends on what you're requesting, what kind of business it is, what you think their normal practices might be, that sort of thing.
We talked about surveillance video, but that's what we hear most about. But are there other types of electronic information out there that a person might have to ask to be preserved?
Absolutely. I mentioned this earlier, law enforcement. Most officers now have these thing called lapel cameras that literally they're on the lapel. They have a control on their belt, and they are being trained to routinely record encounters in any situation with the public. And so that exists. They obviously, that ends up being a lot of data, so they don't necessarily save that forever. If something came of it, it resulted in a criminal charge or something like that, they're supposed to save it, but sometimes they may not. So you may want to request that be preserved. Also, dash cams. It's something that's in the car that the law enforcement has. And by the way, it's not just law enforcement that has these dash cams now. If you're in a rideshare vehicle or taxi, very often now these drivers are keeping video footage to protect themselves, so they can't be accused of doing something wrong. They're saving this, and that can be very helpful in a situation where you might have an encounter that is captured in that video. Also, of course, evidence on our phones. Probably this device is one of the very most important for preserving. And just a host of information is on it. You've got just run through some of it. It's you got text messages, which, by the way, if you delete text messages, the data most likely is still available to someone who makes what's called a mirror copy of your phone. They can restore deleted text messages. So you've got text messages, you've got your emails, you've got your WhatsApp app chats. We have obviously your phone call history, which may be available also in other areas, but it's easiest to find right there on your phone. You got all your contacts, you've got your calendars there, you've got your location tracking. Most people don't really realize the extent of this location tracking thing, and you can try to turn it off, but it's probably still running in one of your apps. There's pretty much a map that can be generated, whether you use an iPhone or a Droid. And even if you use an iPhone, if you have a Google account, your location is probably being tracked by Google in something called Timeline. And instead of being afraid of that, I might invite you to embrace the idea that there's evidence of everywhere you've been. So that can be helpful to you if you're involved in litigation.
Could ultimately protect you and help you in the end, yes. If someone is injured, a plaintiff is injured, but the lawyer tries to get the evidence, but it's already been gotten rid of. It's been spoliated already. What remedies are available to that person?
Right. So every jurisdiction is a little bit different, but as a general rule, the courts will try to cure what has been taken from the litigation. They will try to even the playing field if evidence has been destroyed. So that's the first aim of the courts. They want to say, okay, so if you destroyed this video that would have shown you were responsible for the injuries, if person A does that, then person B may be given a cure, which is these people don't get to deny that they caused the injury. That might be the fix. Or a fix if the courts think that there was some malice in why these people destroyed it. The court can actually tell a jury when it gets to trial, you should assume they destroyed the evidence because it would have been bad for them. That's called the inference instruction. A court can also just find against the party as a sanction. If the destruction of evidence rises to just a really shows extraordinarily bad intent on the part of the spoliator, the judge in most instances has the right to just give the award to the other side. And this can be, it's not just defendants who can be accused of spoliating evidence, plaintiffs can too. This is a two-way street. Everyone needs to understand their responsibility and their duty to preserve evidence.
You mentioned the court's reaction there. Does it matter, I wonder, if these things are filed in state or federal court? Is there a difference?
The laws are slightly different in every jurisdiction, although traditionally in most jurisdictions, plaintiffs have preferred for various reasons to be in state court. But with the spoliation of evidence concept, I will say the federal law is very developed in this area, and it stems, I believe, from the fact that federal obstruction of justice statutes in the criminal arena are very extensive, much more extensive than what you see in criminal tampering with evidence in state courts. And so the judges understand the problem with spoliating evidence. Federal judges don't like to hear that someone has tried to revise history. And so they will come down on it very hard. And in fact, the federal court has created a specific rule of procedure regarding preservation of electronically stored information, and that would include surveillance video. And they have a rule for how courts should create cures and sanctions if they find that spoliation has occurred.
This has been a lot of great information, but Allegra, I'm wondering if you want to give people a takeaway. They're watching this. What should people be remembering about this topic, spoliation of evidence?
The takeaway really here is there's a digital footprint for almost everything we do and say anymore. And it's not only immoral to try to hide evidence, but it's stupid because you'll be caught. So, so we should all, again, for the common good of finding truth so that justice can be fairly dispensed, we should all do our part to preserve evidence.
Allegra Carpenter, thank you so much for all of this information and your time today and sharing it with us.
Thank you, Leslie.
And we thank all of you for watching right now. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss another episode of Ask the Lawyers. We thank you for watching. I'm Leslie Rohde for AskTheLawyers.com, where you can choose a lawyer that lawyers choose.